Good morning. Welcome again to the journey. I know you've already been welcome, but I want to welcome you as well. And if I have never had the opportunity to meet you, my name is Jeremy. I'm the lead pastor here, and we're so glad you're here. What we've been doing in our sermons over the summer mainly is looking not so much at what Jesus did, but at who he is and who he claimed to be. And we're doing that through what we call the I am statements. They're these very unique statements that Jesus made. It's only recorded in one book, in the Gospel of John. It's the fourth book of the New Testament, where Jesus literally 7 times says, I am, and then he fills in the blank. And we're evaluating those claims, whether you're skeptic or seeker or accepting of these things, it's very powerful to go back and look at them again, hearing Jesus say, I am the bread of life, or the good shepherd, or the true vine, the light of the world, all these things. And I want us to see, as soon as Jesus says, I am, as soon as he says those first 2 words, already, before we get anywhere else, it is an act of complete, sheer, utter, undeserved grace and mercy. Why? Because this is Jesus going, let me reveal myself. Let me disclose myself. Let me explain myself to you. Have you ever heard anybody in an argument and you hear them say, I don't have to explain myself to you? Why? Because you're like, you don't have any authority. You're not my boss. Guess what? Jesus doesn't have to explain himself to us, but he chooses to. He says, let me explain myself to you, my creatures, the ones I created. I would like to explain myself. I'll reveal myself to you. And see, what that means that Jesus is coming not just for fans, not even just for followers, but for friends. And later in John 15, he says, I've called you my friends. Why? Because what is it like? What is a friendship like? What is it like when you're getting to know someone, becoming friends? You tell them things about yourself, and they tell you things about themselves, and you listen and hang out and share some interest or whatever. So when Jesus comes and says, I am, he's saying, I've come for your friendship. I've come to make you my friend. I'm revealing myself. See, imagine for a minute, who is the person in the world that you would like most love to meet and get to know? Maybe someone who's advanced in your field, maybe a famous athlete or actor or actress or whatever. And imagine that person just came, showed up at your house, knocked on your door and said, nice to meet you. I am blank. I'd love to get to know you. I'd love to hang out. You'd be like mind blown, crazy. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Matt Damon, or as I call him, Jason Bourne. I was an extra in one of his movies, which is another story entirely. But I will say this: it didn't make in the film, so my wife doesn't believe me. But a couple of us, we got to actually tackle Matt Damon and like jump on him. So your pastor's taking down Jason Bourne. So I'm saying. So I got a chance to meet him we just had a 2-minute conversation in the hospitality tent eating a cheese cube or something like that. And Matt was super nice and very friendly, signed my book. And we had a nice little 2-minute conversation. But at no point in the conversation, at no point during that interaction did I think, oh, we're becoming friends. At no point did I think he's going to ask for my digits or say, hey, bro, come over, kick it at my house tonight. Like, I never thought that was going to, I was never under a delusion that was going to happen. It was a great fan moment, but it wasn't a friend moment. But Jesus comes differently. He says, I am. He's revealing himself to us. And I wonder how we've ever even gotten beyond the grace and the mercy of those 2 words alone. Because God has zero obligation to do it. God owes us nothing. We are entitled to zero with him. He could have just created everything, walked away, never said a single word about it. We're entitled, we'd say, well, if God's real, he should show up, he should do this, prove that, do that, as if God would be subject to our little whims and our little tests. He's God. This is the God who spoke the universe into existence, and he's coming going, let me explain myself to you. How do we ever get past the first 2 words of grace and mercy in that? I can barely control my 4-year-old daughter. This is the God who spoke and a universe came into existence, and he's coming saying, let me explain myself to you. Not because he has to, not because he's obligated to, not because we're entitled to it, but because he chooses to, because he loves you. It's only out of love. So he comes and says, I am. Let me reveal. I'm not just looking for fans. I'm looking for friends. See, the Bible tells us if God doesn't do that, if he didn't come and reveal himself, he didn't come and explain himself, then we would never have any opportunity to find him. We would never discover him. We would never just like happen upon him. Our little investigations and inquiries would never show up. We would have no more chance of finding, understanding, knowing God than, say, Hamlet would have of finding Shakespeare. Unless Shakespeare decided to write himself into his own story. And when Jesus says, I am, that's exactly what he's saying. God has written himself into his own story in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus says, I am. I'm revealing myself to you. And today, in chapter 10, we see what he reveals himself to be. And look at verse 7 and verse 9, and you hear what he says. Verse 7, he says, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. Verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. Now, I am the door. Perhaps it's the oddest of all the I am statements. Like, all the other ones seem so much more like robust and cool. Like, I'm the light of the world and the bread of life and the resurrection and the vine that, grapes and wine, all this. I'm the door. I'm the door of the sheep. Like, who wants to be around sheep? Who wants to do, it seems so odd. What does he mean by that? Well, verse 6 tells us he's using a figure of speech. He's using an illustration, a metaphor. And in verse 9, again, he says, I'm the door. If anyone enters by me. See, what's a door? A door is an entrance, right? A door is a way in. A door is access to an area that you would normally be denied. A door is access to something great. When he says, I am the door, he's saying, I am the access point to something great. And I've opened it for you. See, a door is an entrance. A door is access, like a backstage pass, right? You go to your favorite concert, you'd love to have a backstage pass to get through and hang out. Get through the door. Jesus says, I've opened the door. I don't know about you, but I don't know if you ever go to these museums or go to a famous person's house. Like I took my family to Graceland and Elvis's house back in March, and every time you go to one of these museums or little house tours or whatever, there's always 2 or 3 sections, and there's a little rope and then a sign that says, no one beyond this point, staff only, whatever. That's an invitation for me. When I see that little rope, I just look around. And I'm going through there because I want to see what are they denying me access to. I want to get to that thing. There's a couple of Journey staff members who can testify to this and took a little trip to Texas with me. And in fact, actually several years ago, I went to D.C. with my wife and literally got kicked out of the U.S. Capitol building for doing this. Turns out, FYI, the Secret Service takes these things slightly more seriously than, say, Graceland. Just a little travel tip for you in the future. We all want access, right? We want access. We want to get inside. We want to get backstage. And Jesus is saying, I'm the door. I'm the access point. That's what he's talking about. We use this door terminology ourselves, right? We say, my professor or my boss has an open door policy, which means what? I have access to her person, her privilege, her knowledge, whatever it is. We talk about doors as opportunities, right? We say some people are, born with doors of opportunity open to them. Some are born with them closed. And we talk about opportunity knocking. Opportunity comes knocking, right? We have this idea that a door is an opportunity. A door is an access point to something great. And this whole idea, see, everybody believed, and many people still do, especially then and even now, that if God was real, if God exists, well, you'd never be able to really know him. You'd never be able to really find him. You'd never really be able to get him to accept you. There might be a couple of elite, wilderness monks that somehow, SEAL Team 6 elite people that finally find the way and climb the ladder up to God and achieve everything. But you're never going to find him. And Jesus says, I'm the door. I've opened the way to God for you. You don't have to climb the wall. You don't have to scale the tower. I am the door. There's no rope. There's no one admitted beyond this point. There's an open door in Christ. That's what he says when he says, I'm the door. I'm access. And he puts it in language that they can understand. So that's why he starts talking about these sheep. And we wonder about that because in the Western world, we don't know anything about sheep. And I mean, maybe some of you do. I don't want to presume. There might be a couple sheep experts out there. But most of us don't know anything about it. But these people did. So Jesus comes. He doesn't come to them with quantum physics. He comes to them in language they can understand, agrarian sheep language. So this is what he's doing. Verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold, that's like the sheep pen, by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber, right? We all know this. If you're my friend, you come to my house, you come in the door. Anybody breaking the window and coming in, thief and a robber, I'm calling the police, right? Like there's only a legitimate way to come in. Verse 2, but he who enters the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. In other words, security says, come on through. Backstage pass granted. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls the sheep by name, and then he leads them out. Here's what Jesus is doing. Here's what the shepherding deal was. During the day, the shepherd would take the sheep, lead them out into green pastures, find a stream where they could drink, a place where they could, graze and do all that kind of stuff. And the whole time, the shepherd's on guard. He's on duty. He's not some little, kid in a Christmas play with a weird little hat on and a little crook. He's on guard to kill the wolves and the lions that are going to come and attack the sheep. And if they do, he's ready. And then at night, the shepherd needs to rest too because he's been on guard all day. So he leads the sheep back into a place of security, a sheepfold, a pen that looks something like this. And usually they would let briars and thorns just grow up all over the walls and coil up on the tops, which is sort of like ancient version of razor wire, right? Prison wire, so that nobody could come in and mess with the sheep. And if you read the passage, you say, well, Jesus is saying I'm the door and I'm the shepherd. Like, isn't he mixing these metaphors up here? We'll just look a little bit closer at the picture. There would be one gap, one opening in the sheep pen. You see what's in there? It's the shepherd. He's the one lying there. See, the shepherd would put the sheep in, and then at night, he would lie down to sleep himself. He would lay himself over the gap. He would lay himself in the gap, thus becoming the door, becoming the gate to the sheep. In other words, saying, if anyone would come and try to harm my sheep, he's got to go through me first. And Jesus says, I am that door. I guard the sheep. And when the wolves come, see, he said, the way you know I'm true is that I came for them, not for me, but for them. And the way you know he's true is that when the wolf comes, Jesus says, I'll let the wolf sink his teeth into me, and I'll tear those teeth out, and I'll defang him so that he can never fully sink his teeth into you. Jesus stands in the gap. He literally lays down his own life on the cross in the gap so that he can open the door of salvation to me and to you. That's what he's saying when he's saying, I'm the door. I'm the access point. And we say, well, access to what? Like, what is it we get into here? I don't care that much about being in a sheep sty, but Jesus says, I'm the access point. And he's saying, I'm access not just to some little spiritual deal on a Sunday morning. I'm access to real life. Look at what he says again in verse 9. In verse 9, he says, I'm the door. If anyone enters by me, he'll be saved, and he'll go in and out. In other words, you have total access. The door's open. And find pasture. What does it mean to find pasture? Well, pasture means like the sheep are free to, have their little adventures, free to eat, free to drink, free to run around, and they'll be unmolested by their enemies, by the wolves or whatever that would be sort of coming, or robbers. And Jesus says, in a spiritual way, that's what I'm providing, that's what I'm offering. In other words, listen, we think our biggest problems, our biggest enemies, it's our boss, our job, our friend, our roommate, our spouse. Jesus said, your biggest problem in life is your sin. Your biggest problem in life is sin, death, and hell. And Jesus says, I've defeated those. I can provide pasture and freedom for those. You don't have to pay the penalty of your sin. I've paid it. You don't have to pay you don't have to be bound by the power of your sin. I have overcome it. And I've opened the door to you. I've opened the access point to real life. Verse 10, he says this, and I think this should surprise us because we literally just think about this. We just had weird pictures of Jesus. And he says, there's a thief that comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that they might have what? They might have what? Life, and have it, what, in a small, un poquito? No, to have it abundantly. That you might have it abundantly. That means little. I don't know if you got that. He says, I came that you might have real life, have it abundantly. In other words, Jesus is saying, here's the whole reason I came. We think, listen, Jesus did not come and die, and live and die on the cross and rise from the dead just so you could go to heaven when you die. Like, wait, what? Don't I get to go to heaven if I believe in Jesus? Yes, but that's just one small part of the gospel. That's just one little piece of it. That's just one little slice of it. What Jesus is saying is, I came to bring life to everything that feels dead. In Revelation 21, he says it differently. Behold, I am making all things new. He's got a much bigger purpose than giving you some fire insurance one day. Death, that's great, but we tend to go, yep, got that checked off. Now I'm done. No, he came to not just to send you to heaven one day when you die. He came to put heaven into you right now so that you could put it into the world. He came to give us a mission and a purpose. He's like, I'm coming to bring life. Real life. See, that word is Zoe. There's two words in Greek. There's bios and Zoe. Bios is biological life. All right, biology, right? You know that I'm alive because I'm walking around, my heart's beating, my lungs are breathing, my brain is minimally functioning in some way, so I'm alive. But Jesus says, yeah, you got that life, but I came to bring you real life. Like, you tell people to get a life. I came to give you a life. I came to give you a purpose, a meaning, a mission, a contentment, a satisfaction. Most of us spend a ton of our lives not going around knocking on every door we can find thinking this will be it. We knock on these doors and we think if that door was open to me, then I could finally be happy. I could finally be content. I could finally be satisfied. And we spend all this frantic time knocking on doors of power and success and money and sex and relationship and trying to please other people and think we're going to finally get there. But we find good things behind those doors, but it's sort of like a starving man going to a restaurant. You get a little appetizer, but the real meal never comes. And you're always hungry. You're always looking for another door to knock on. Jesus says, I'm the door. I'm the access to what you've been looking for all your life. I am the access point to real life. So that just comes so some people could die and go to heaven. I came to bring life to everything, which means that's the mission. If you're a Christian, if you call yourself a Christian, that's your mission. That's the mission of this church, is to look out into your spheres of influence and go, what would it look like if God brought life into that? To imagine to yourself, what would it look like if the dead places in my heart came alive, were really alive? The dead places in my family. What would it look like if God made our education system new? What would it look like if he made my workplace, if he brought life into that place? What would it look like if he brought life into the injustices of our land? And to take everything that he has said, everything he's told us in his word, and then to imagine, what would it look like if God were to bring full, abundant life into this area, and then we ask the Spirit for that power and we go do it? Jesus says, I came to bring life. Our task is to be looking out. How do I bring life to someone who's hurting and care for them? How do I bring life to these things? See, do you sit around daydreaming about what it would be like if life came? Or do you spend your time daydreaming about, well, I got this going on, my job, my balance sheet, my whatever? Or do you spend time daydreaming about, man, what would it be like if Jesus showed up and brought life to this place? If Jesus showed up and made my heart alive again? If Jesus showed up and brought life to the systems that are so broken or dead or corrupt? What would it look like if God brought revival, if his kingdom came really on earth as it is in heaven? What would it really look like? Do you sit around and daydream about that? And being part of that God's called us. He's written you into that mission. He's written you into that story. See, the whole point when he says that is if you're a Christian, you have life and you want to share life. Is that what you want to do? Is that what you're doing? See, a church, we're not supposed to be an audience. We're supposed to be an army. A church is supposed to be not an audience, but an army. I don't mean weird religious violence stuff. I'm talking about an army of love, an army of life, an army that shares the justice and mercy and joy of Jesus with all the people in which we come in contact with. It's a great mission of the church. Church is not just an audience. It's supposed to be an army. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm the door to life, real life. And so I wonder, when we pray, what are we asking God for really? You know, we pray and ask God for his presence, right? Like, a lot of times I just pray, Lord, help me. Lord, go with me, be with me. And I realize even this week, a lot of times when I'm praying that prayer, I'm saying, hey, Jesus, I'm going to go do this, and I'd really like it if you'd go along and make this work, bless this for me. See, when you pray, when you ask God for his presence, are you asking him to go along with your will, or is it a prayer of commitment to his will? That's how you know you hear his voice. That's how you know you're part of his sheep. Are you looking at him and saying, man, whatever, wherever, whenever, for whomever, whatever it costs, I want to see your life, Jesus, come to people in my life and to places in my life. That's what he's talking about. See, this is a big claim. It's a crazy claim in a lot of ways to say, I am the door. Like he could say, hey, I'm a teacher. I've been studying this a long time. I can show you the door. I can show you the access point to real life. He didn't say, I'll show it to you. He didn't say, I learned about it somewhere. He says, I am the door. Not there are like 25 of them and you can choose, but I am the door. It's a huge claim, and it's actually crazy because if you read all like chapters 5 to 10, you see that because of these kinds of claims, people are arguing with Jesus and attacking him all the way through. Chapter 10, we like to think of it as like, oh, he's talking about sheep and shepherd, and it's this sweet pastoral image, and Jesus is a little lamb snuggler and so pretty. And it's not what's happening at all. There's constant attack and debate going there, attacking him, and there's this whole question hanging over all of chapter 5 to 10. Who is this man? Who is this man that claims to be this kind of deal and does these kind of strange things? And they argue back and forth, and I could read you I pulled out like 30 of these. I'm just going to read you two. There are two different reactions to Jesus. Chapter 10, verse 20, many of them said, Jesus has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him? Chapter 9, verse 38, the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Can I suggest for just a moment that there are only two credible responses to Jesus, and those two things? If you've really, listen, I know that we like to kind of go, yeah, Jesus is cool, you know, he did this, and nice things, good teacher, whatever. And so but if you look at Jesus and go, yeah, I take some, I leave some. If you look at Jesus and go, whatever. If you look at Jesus and shrug your shoulders, you haven't heard what he's saying. There are only two credible reactions to Jesus, only two possible emotional responses if you've really heard him. It is either this man is a demon and is insane and we should get rid of him, or we should worship him. There's the only two responses, and this has been pointed out many times, but maybe one of the best is by Bono, lead singer of U2. He was asked in an interview many years ago about this weird faith you have about Jesus, and the interviewer says to Bono, don't you think it's far-fetched to believe Jesus is God? And this is his response, which is great. He said, no, it's not far-fetched to me. Look, the secular response to the Christ story always goes like this. Jesus was a great prophet, an interesting guy. He had a lot to say like other prophets, Elijah, Muhammad, Buddha, Confucius. But actually, Christ doesn't allow you that. He doesn't let you off that hook. He says, no. I'm not saying I'm just a teacher. I'm not saying I'm just a prophet. Don't just call me a teacher and a prophet. I'm saying I'm the Messiah. I'm saying I am God incarnate. And people say, no, please just be a teacher. Please just be a prophet. A prophet we can take, a teacher we can take, but don't say the M word. Don't say Messiah, because if you do, you know we're going to have to crucify you. And then he says this. So what you're left with is either Jesus Christ was who he said he was, the Messiah, or a complete nutcase. I mean talking nutcase on the level of Charles Manson. I'm not joking here. But the idea that the entire course of human civilization and over half the globe has had its fate changed by a nutcase, to me, that is far-fetched. You see what he's saying? He's saying there's only two possible responses. And guess what? They both take faith. And I know some of you are thinking to yourself, you know what? I'm starting to get sort of the Jesus thing. I sort of get some of it, but I don't know if I have enough faith to accept his claims. And that's a great place to keep investigating, keep talking, let's have conversation about that. It's a great place to be. But let me ask you this question as well. One side of the question is to say, do I have enough faith to accept his claims? But what Bono's pointing out is the question of, do you have enough faith to reject them? Which is more far-fetched? And he says, I think it's far-fetched to believe somebody on the level of a Charles Manson nutcase could change the whole world. And I agree with him. I think it takes more faith to actually reject Jesus' claims to be the door, to be the life, than to actually accept them. And that's what Jesus is saying when he says, I'm the door. He says, I've opened it to you. I'm not saying I'm the door because I'm slamming in your face. I've said it because I'm opening it to you. So who gets it? How do you get it? How do you get this real life, this abundant thing that Jesus is talking about? Who gets it? And I think we got to really make this personal, because otherwise we know how to talk ourselves out of grace. We know how to talk ourselves out of grace. And Jesus says in verse 9, if anyone enters, the door's open. Anyone, but I think he even makes it more specific. See, he talks about specific people. As I said, chapters 9 and 10 run together. Chapter divisions in the Bible are not part of the text. That was something we put in later to organize it. Chapters 9 and 10 go together. And if you look back at chapter 9, this crazy thing happens. Jesus heals a man that's blind from birth. And if you were in that day born blind, if you were born with any defect, you were considered the least likely, the least expected person to know anything about God or to have any favor from God, because obviously he was cursing you, punishing you for your sin, or else you wouldn't have this issue. And yet Jesus goes to that man and heals him. And when he heals him, the religious leaders don't like this, and they call him in. And even his own parents won't stand up for him at the little trial. And they reject him. In verse 34, chapter 9, they say this to him. They say to this blind man just been healed, you are born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. And that's not just like, hey, get out of here. That is like, we've excommunicated you. You're not part of the synagogue, the church. We have no other thing for you to do. But verse 35, Jesus heard they cast him out, and having found him. To say found means that Jesus went looking, that Jesus is seeking. The people among us that seem least likely to know anything about God or ever be merited God's favor, those are the people Jesus is looking for. And I know that some of you feel like you're that person. Some of you feel like, man, I've just been on the outs, maybe recently or maybe all my life. Always the person people tend to ignore. People don't tend to talk to me at the parties. I've never been like brought in the inside. I've never been part of the inner circle. Never got picked for the team. Jesus seeks you. When he says, I'm the door, he's saying, I've opened the way to the least expected among us, the smallest, the most rejected. All you have to do is admit you're lost. We don't want to stop and ask for directions because we can't admit we're lost. If you want to be found by Jesus, you just say, I'm lost. Jesus, save me. See, the least expected. And not only that, but maybe you're confused. Maybe you're just like, you just don't really get it. What does this mean? It's all these metaphors and analogies I don't get. Listen, you're not the only one. Look at verse 6. Verse 6, it says, this figure of speech Jesus used, but they did not understand what he was saying. Like his disciples, people that went around with him and knew him. These aren't just some cats that walked up. These are people that knew him, and you're like, we don't get what you're saying here. Listen, I know some of us we're just spiritually confused. We don't have all the answers. And a lot of times we think, well, I've got to get my life right, and I got to get the answers, I get all my theology right, I got to understand the whole Bible, and then maybe Jesus will take me. No, I'm the door. I've opened it up to you. Even the spiritually confused, even the people that don't have all the answers. Listen, let me tell you something. I am a pastor. I've studied the Bible for years and years, and there are so many times I am confused. Like, there's so many times I'm like, Jesus, why is this happening but not that? Or are you encouraging? Is this a conviction, rebuke? I mean, I'm trying to figure out, where are you taking us? Why is this not going? And you know what Jesus does? He goes, well, if you don't get it, I don't have any time for you. Look at verse 7. So Jesus again said to them. You don't get it? Jesus will come again. You don't get it? Jesus is pursuing you. You don't get it? You don't think you have all the answers? Jesus says, you don't have to have all the answers. All you need to know is that I'm the door. And if you want access to real life, just believe in me. Just come through me. You don't have to get it all together. Just call on me. And some of us are sort of the other side. We're religious and we think we have all the answers. Like I said, Jesus, chapters 5 to 10, all Jesus arguing, dialoguing with these religious leaders who don't get it. And you think, Jesus, why are you wasting all your time with these people? They don't get it. And Jesus says, because I love them. The door's open to religious people so don't confuse Jesus and religion. Religious people are not necessarily Christians. They may be people who are just going like, you know what, I'm going to scale the wall myself. Like we're like my kids, right? Like, I do it. I will do it. I don't want to go through the door. I'll climb the wall myself. But religious people are pretenders and they're posers. They want to hide behind their good works and their positions and the fact that they have all their stuff lined up. But Jesus says, I'm going to unmask all that. And I'm pursuing you until you come through the door. And there's others of us that we're on the rebel side. Like we know we don't want to have anything to do with God. We just walk that way our whole life. We haven't had much to do with God. We've ignored him. We just don't care. And if you're in that camp, Jesus comes. When he says, I'm the shepherd, shepherd is kingship language. And even now, if you go to the Middle East, the king of a nation will talk about himself as the shepherd of his people. He's the shepherd of the people. And when Jesus says, I'm the shepherd, he's saying, I'm the king. And what do we expect any real king to do? If a king has a rebellion on his hands, a king should crush that rebellion. But Jesus says, I'm not like any king that you know about. I didn't come to crush. I came to call. See, Jesus is the king that comes for the sake of the sheep. He says, I love you so much, you who have spit in my face, I'll lay down my life for you. You who are a rebel, I don't come to crush you, I come to call you to myself. The door is open. You can come in. If anyone enters in, he will be saved. We talk ourselves out of grace. Don't talk yourself out of grace. Even last night after the service, I was standing in the back of the last song and I saw a woman that I kind of know, and she sort of hustled out the door. I could tell she hustled out early because she didn't want anyone to talk to her after the service. So I chased her down. Pastoral ministry through awkwardness, that's my philosophy. No, I felt compelled actually by God that I could just see something. I just chased her down. I caught her on the sidewalk out there. And we started talking, and she said, I get what you said in there, but I am the exception to God's grace. And I could just see the pain in her eyes. And I said, look at verse 9. I am the door if anyone enters. And I said, you are anyone. And Jesus is saying that to every one of you this morning. You are anyone. Don't try to work your way or talk your way out of the grace of Jesus. He's opened the door of access to you. Don't run around spending your life trying to knock on every other door thinking this will be it. Jesus has said, the door's open. I am the door. Admit that you're lost. Admit that you need him and believe in him and come in. Because in reality, there are only really two doors. There's the door of Jesus and there's just everything else. And I'll admit the everything else door, it looks very cool. It's painted nicely, a lot of cool decorations on it. But the Bible says there is a way that a man desires that leads to destruction. And Jesus' door honestly doesn't look like much. It's an old little piece of rustic wood. But when that wood is stretched out into a cross, it becomes a door that opens the way to God. And if you believe in Jesus, then you can walk in the door. The door to eternal life, the door to salvation, the door to God himself. So are you running around frantically? I'll just ask a couple questions to close. Ask yourself these questions. What false doors am I hoping in, am I trusting in, that I think will bring me real life? Have I actually entered in through the door? Have I just thought I did? Is today the day of salvation? There's many of us in this room who have never actually believed in Jesus. And you can today and walk in the door. Have you really entered in? Or have you just confused religion with Jesus? Maybe you've been around the church a long time. Maybe your parents were Christians. Have you confused those things? Checking a box, walking an aisle, praying a prayer. Have you confused that with life, with Jesus? Jesus says, I'm the door, come in. And if I claim to be a Christian, do I have a passion to see other people come to the door and see other people enter? To be on a mission of bringing life to the whole world because it's been put into me. Where are you this morning? Jesus says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. C.S. Lewis said, if anyone comes to Jesus, the door on which he's been knocking all your life will open at last. Jesus himself, in an even more famous sermon, said, seek and you will find. Ask and you will receive. Knock and the door will be open to you. Friends, the door of God's grace is wide open because Jesus allowed it to be slammed in his face on the cross. And so he could open it to you and never hear access denied. Come through the door. Let's go to him in prayer. Jesus, we just want to pray and ask that you would right now come and, Lord, there are many, you say in verse 16 that you have sheep that are not of this, that are not yet in the fold that you need to bring in. And Lord, if anyone is here today and they haven't gone through the door, they haven't entered, Lord, I pray you'd bring them in right now. I pray they would believe in you right now. They would say, I'm confessing my sin and trusting Jesus. And that, Lord, you would bring them in. Jesus, I pray that you would give us as individuals and as a church a desire to bring life to all the hurting people and broken places that we encounter. God, help us know that we are not simply an audience, we're an army. We're men and women who are sent out with the mission of Jesus. And Jesus, we worship you because you've opened the door of salvation. I pray that we enter in and experience abundant life. In your name we pray. Amen.